Yes, that's right. That's a dandy. That covers the whole field. And now let's name a specific kind of worker. Mr. Kieran?
The steward wrote, the butler squalled, and so forth. It's in Tennyson's The Sleeping Beauty, Princess, describing the reawakening of the household.
That's an unfamiliar one, or at least unfamiliar to me. Mr. Levant?
Waiter, water, waiter. I don't know.
Yeah, there was a funny song about...
Yeah, waiter, water.
Waiter, water. Yeah, that's right. Mr. Adams?
That's ration now.
Mr. Adams?
Where are you going, my pretty maid?
Maid, yes, very good. What a bright wit you have, Mr. Adams. Mr. Kieran?
They also serve who only stand and wait.
Yes, doesn't mention the waiter particularly. Mr. Adams again?
How green was my valley?
Well, this program will be over in a little while. Now here's one from Anson Murray Harris of Washington, D.C. Here are some made-up headlines. What emperors, whether of the past or present, are involved in them? The first headline is, Duke gives Emperor shellacking. Now, this refers to a real emperor, Mr. Kieran.
The Duke of Wellington on June 18th, 1815.
Yes?
Daylight
The
savings.
Battle of Waterloo with a little aid from Lucan.
Yes, defeated.
Napoleon.
Yes, defeated the Emperor Napoleon. Very good. Now, how about this headline? Empress switches boyfriends. Empress switches boyfriends.
Catherine, as played by Marlene Dietrich.
Yes, or played by anybody.
You can understand it in her.
Catherine the Great of what country?
It used to be Russia of her time.
Yes, Russia of her time. And she was given to changing boyfriends, often in midstream. Now, here's a third and last. Emperor slapped down, king again after 5 years. Emperor slapped down, king again after 5 years. That applies to whom?
Carol of Romania was out for 5 years.
I don't know that he was ever an emperor, though.
He was slapped down.
True enough. But he never was an emperor.
All right.
There are some people who think he
9
never
days
was a
of
king.
queen. That doesn't fit.
No, it doesn't fit. Gentlemen, Victor Emmanuel was emperor of Ethiopia and Italy from 1936 to 1941. But when the British recaptured it, of course, he became king of Italy. Neither what I would call a durable job. Well, that gives us 2 out of 3 on that and sends us on to a question from Donald Barr of New York City. In what movie about spies, all of these questions are about movies that involve spies, in what one is a spy plot overheard by a man who is trying to recover his lost golf clubs? A spy plot is overheard by a man who's trying to recover his lost golf clubs. Well, if you haven't seen the movie, you just won't know the answer.
What's the movie?
If I gave you the title, you could give me the name, doubtless.
Well, we give up. What is it?
Night Train, the one in which Rex Harrison and Margaret Lockwood appeared. Remember that, Mr. Hitchcock?
I never saw it. I never go to movies.
You never go to movies? Well, there are some very good ones produced by a man named Hitchcock. You want to go to see every once in a while?
I don't even go to those.
You don't go to those. Well, the rest of us make up for you. In what movie about spies does the butler show he recognizes his master by serving him a glass of milk? The butler serves a man a glass of milk, and by this gesture he indicates that he knows who he is. Well, it's in a movie called Nazi Agent, in which Conrad Veidt appears.
Didn't see it.
Didn't see that one? Say, that must be the only one you never saw, Oscar.
Well,
You must have had a cold.
That's 2 wrong. How about this one? In what movie is a spy ring discovered in a windmill? A spy ring discovered in a windmill.
Mr. Hitchcock's foreign correspondent.
Didn't you even see that one, Mr. Hitchcock?
A bit of it.
Yes, that's the only one we got right, and that sends a $50 war bond to Mr. Barr, courtesy of Lucky Strike, and a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica to boot, and sends us on to a question from Laverne Verplank of Rochester, New York. Who exposed whom in the following situations? A villain was exposed by his own wife. Mr. Kieran.
Well, I think in part Iago was exposed by his wife.
Yes, he was. What was his wife's name, Mr. Kieran?
His wife's name, well, I can't think of it off.
Adams generally remembers the ladies' names. Mr. Adams, do you remember?
I don't remember. Mrs. I used to call her.
Amelia. Amelia W. Iago. Yes, she explains the handkerchief plot after Desdemona's death. Now, how about this one? An ex-clerk, risen to the rank of partner, is exposed by another clerk. Mr. Hitchcock?
I'm not certain. I was wondering whether it was Galsworthy's justice.
I don't think so, but I'm not certain, and you may be quite right.
Well, that situation did occur.
That's what I'd have said.
Well, that settles it. Probably is right. Mr. Kieran, another answer?
I think that's in David Copperfield.
Yes, who
I
was
think
the
it's
one who...
Uriah Heep, who was exposed, of course, by the ebullient Mr. Micawber.
That's right. Yes, that was the one that I remembered because that's the book I happen to have read, Mr. Hitchcock. Now, how about this one? An enemy agent is exposed by a fellow worker in an airplane factory. Mr. Levant.
Mr. Hitchcock, saboteur.
Mr. Hitchcock, saboteur, yes. Mr. Hitchcock, either you have no memory at all or you're unduly modest.
I'm afraid it's the latter.
Oh. Well, I would have thought so if you had answered differently. How about this one from Dean S. Smith of Minneapolis? Gentlemen, I want you to create for us, right on this platform here, a meal of at least 3 courses, each of which includes a wine or liquor in the cooking or preparation. Now, let's begin with a course that generally does begin a meal. How about it, Mr. Hitchcock?
Did you say which includes a wine or...
In the cooking or preparation of the food.
Buffalo mode.
Buffalo mode would give us the main course. What wine would be used in buffalo
I
mode?
would say a Burgundy or any leftovers.
Yes,
Are used in the kitchen.
as long as it's a red wine.
Yes, a red wine.
That's quite right. Well, that gives us our entree, but usually before an entree we have what?
You can have grapefruit with anything you want in it.
Soup.
Say, that's right, you can.
You can
Mr.
try it.
Adams?
You could...
Have a soup with sherry.
I was going to say...
What soup, though?
Very often mock turtle.
Yeah, turtle soup
no,
with sherry.
beg your pardon.
Mr. Hitchcock?
Not mock turtle.
Not mock turtle.
Regular turtle.
Real turtle soup with sherry.
He has never had real turtle, Mr. Hitchcock. He only knows mock turtle. Yes.
Borscht. You don't put any wine in borscht.
No, there is no way of improving borscht. That gives us soup or entree. Now, we ought to get something to end our meal with, Mr. Hitchcock.
Oh, you could have cherries Jubilee.
How is that
made?
made?
Of liqueurs,
Yes.
in which you cook the cherries and pour the whole thing over some
Pour it over your
lovely
face.
ice cream.
Yum, yum.
You're making Mr. Adams faint.
You have crepe Suzette.
How do you make that?
You make this a small pancake cooked in liqueurs.
You just light a match any place, you can make them.
Mr. Kieran?
You can have old-fashioned plum pudding with the brandy burning on it.
Yes, and to judge from that equatorial waistline of Mr. Hitchcock, he has all of them. from time to time. Well, that gives us 3 out of 3, and now here's Mr. Rysdale and Mr. Cross.
The best tunes of all moved to Carnegie Hall. Yes, the best tunes of all moved to Carnegie Hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, the story of what makes a better cigarette can be told in just 2 words: fine tobacco. For in a cigarette, it's the tobacco that counts. And smokers, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. At auctions all over the South, year after year, we consistently select and buy the riper, lighter, milder Lucky Strike leaf. No wonder that with independent experts, with men who know tobacco best, it's Lucky's 2 to 1. In choosing your own cigarette, take a tip from the experts. Remember, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco, so round, so firm, so fully packed, so free and easy on the draw.
The best tunes of all moved to Carnegie Hall. Yes, the best tunes of all moved to Carnegie Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Rysdale and Mr. Cross. And now a question from Leon Chase of Providence, Rhode Island. If a commanding officer were ordered to attack enemy positions with these forces, I'll name them for you, would he be operating with numerically superior or inferior forces? Now, suppose he were in command of a platoon against a section. Would he be superior or inferior to the enemy? He had a platoon, the enemy had a section. Mr. Kieran?
He would be inferior to the enemy.
No, as I understand it, he would be superior.
Well, I don't know what in the world a section
What's
is,
a
but
section?
a platoon is pretty small, I can tell you that.
Yes, but a section is apparently smaller still. It comes between a squad and a platoon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a new invention.
Well, I wouldn't have known it either if I hadn't had it on this card. He would be superior. Now, suppose he were in command of a battalion and were operating against a brigade. Mr. Hitchcock?
He'd be inferior.
He would be inferior. That's quite right, numerically inferior. And suppose he were in command of a field army operating against an army corps. Mr. Hitchcock again.
Oh, I would say he's still inferior.
No, he would be superior,
Superior.
in that How did you know, Mr. Adams?
I could have guessed the same way.
Because a corps is smaller than the field army.
Because a corps is smaller than a field army, that's quite right. Field army is the largest unit, as I understand it. Well, that gives us 2 wrong and sends a $50 war bond to Mr. Chase, plus a set of the Britannica, courtesy of Lucky Strike, and sends us on to this question from Miss K.C. Adams of Montreal, Canada. This is a poetical question, gentlemen. I'm going to ask you simply to complete these quotations. Between the cradle and the grave, how can you complete the quotation? I mean, there is a real...
Between the cup and the lip.
No. Actually, the completion of the quotation gives you a rhyme. Mr. Adams? I should expect so. It was one of your favorite poets.
Do it again, Mr. Fowler.
Between the cradle and the grave lies a haircut and a shave. From Sam Hoffenstein's Songs of Faith in the Year After Next. That gives us 1 wrong. Now, how about completing this one? And so betwixt them both, you see, Mr. Adams.
They licked the platter clean.
Yes, how does that begin?
Mr. and Mrs. Spratt.
Yes, and what is the whole story of Mr.
Jack
and Mrs.
Spratt could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean, and then your part.
That's right. They'd have a tough time these days. Now, but here's another one to complete. Between the dark and the daylight. Mr. Kieran.
When the night is beginning to lower, comes a pause.
Lower.
All right, lower. Comes a pause in the day's occupation, which is known as the children's hour.
Yeah. Got you there, Mr. Adams. So it is a lower instead of lower. Mr. Adams is quite right. What does it mean? What does lower mean, Mr. Adams?
Lower.
No.
You're lucky if it's lower.
Something like that, yes. Well, I guess that's all we'll have time for. Thank you, Mr. Hitchcock, for adding to the entertainment this evening. Now, in a few seconds, I'll announce next week's guests. Tonight, Lucky Strike has paid out 2 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica and 2 $50 war bonds. And speaking of bonds, here's one way to think about them. Suppose you knew that you could shorten the war by just 1 second. Suppose that second to have been the time it took for one of the Nazi child murderers to kill your own son or brother or father. Suppose you could abolish that fatal second by the purchase of a bond. You'd buy, wouldn't you? Well, your bond purchases do shorten the war. Each bond you buy makes it possible to destroy more Nazi child murderers. Each Nazi child murderer that you kill with your bond means that the chances are increased for your own American boy to come back to you safe and sound. You tell me a better reason for buying war bonds. Next week, in addition to Mr. Adams and Mr. Kieran, we will have as our guests the co-authors of that charming bestseller, Our Hearts Were Young and Gay, Cornelia Otis Skinner and Emily Kimbrough. Remember to send letters with questions and the correct answers to information, please, at 480 Lexington Avenue, New York City. And now a parting message from Mr. L.A. Speed Riggs, famous tobacco auctioneer from Goldsboro, North Carolina.